What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I wanted to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down some very important things that Jerome Powell said about the economy, which has caused the market to pull back a bit, not to mention new developments that we're seeing on the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. The offer ends very soon in just about 2.5 weeks. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So we saw SPY drop about 0.64% for the day. We saw the market in the red, especially after Jerome Powell gave his speech, and he said some very important things about what the Fed is doing. So I want to give you guys some context about inflation, what caused Jerome Powell to cause this rug pull, and why the market's now looking a little bit weaker going into tomorrow as we have some gaps to potentially fill. But first, let's talk about this data. So just know this, the market is for the most part in the red. We're seeing finance a little bit mixed, but more red. We're seeing tech kind of mixed as well. We saw some big tech stocks kind of flat, but for the most part, the market's more red. And then we saw red all over the place when it comes to health technology, consumer durables. We saw Tesla sell off, and the list goes on. So the market has seen quite a bit of selling for today, and we may see this trend continue going into tomorrow, especially as we approach some big reports. Now, just know this, as far as the data is going, we had PPI data for today. As a reminder, everything was close to expectations, but we did see some increases in terms of what we were looking at on a year-over-year basis. So core PPI year over year was at 3.1%, a slight increase compared to before. Of course, this is like a little bit higher than expected, and that wasn't that great. And then PPI year over year was at 2.4%. This was above expectations somewhat, and an increase by quite some margin relative to before. This is part of why the market dipped a bit, and then this dip just continued with Jerome Powell's speech. For tomorrow, we have very, very minor data. We just have essentially export and import prices before market open, then some manufacturing numbers around 15 minutes after market open, but most of the data is quite minor. Despite that, I just want to make it very clear that there is some fear right now that's starting to build in this market, especially after Jerome Powell started his speech. So why did Jerome Powell cause a rug pull? What's going on with what he said? Let's talk about the context. Firstly, PPI did come up a little bit, and that's not that great. But on top of that, CPI also increased it to some extent. So if you guys look at the trend on core CPI, you guys can see it right over here, this maroon line. This was on a strong downtrend for almost the entire year. And then as of recent, it did start to surge just a little bit higher. If you go to September and then parts of October, it did go up just a little bit. And then we also saw the same thing happen in the month of October for all items CPI. This was downtrending every single month since April, right? April, May, June, it was just downtrending, downtrending, downtrending. And for the first time, we got a slight increase. Now, this does not guarantee that inflation is going to spike up, because there have been instances where it just went up just a little bit only to come back down, right? So it doesn't guarantee anything. We have to continue to see a couple more reports to see more data to truly see how this is going to look. But for the time being, just know that this was a little bit more negative, and that's the reason why Jerome Powell had to be a little bit more cautious. So that's why Jerome Powell caused the rug pull. So what Jerome Powell said was the Fed now has to look at the data very carefully. They're going to be very patient when it comes to what they're doing with rates. And he said, and I quote, the Fed does not need to be in a hurry to reduce interest rates. So that's a very, very big shift. Before, Jerome Powell was talking about potential cuts that could be coming, how the Fed was making so much progress, inflation was falling like a rock. Now he's saying that inflation's on a very, very nice path to the 2% targets, but the Fed does not have to be in a hurry to reduce these rates. This is a very, very big shift from before, and this caused a little bit less certainty about the Fed giving some other cuts in December. That's why we ended up seeing the odds end up going down. So you can see the chart right here. The odds of us getting that 25 basis point cut went down, and the odds of them keeping rates the same is what's starting to go up. I actually have a better chart right here. You guys can see it. So now there's about a 60% chance the Fed gives us a 25 basis point cut on December 18th during the next FOMC meeting. There's about a 39.4% chance they keep rates the same. So what could happen tomorrow, because of the fear that could be building because of this could start to go up a little bit more. This might start inching higher, and then this might start to inch a little bit lower, making this like 50-50 on both ends. That is what is fueling the market to sell off a bit, so just keep that in mind. In terms of earnings, just know that for tomorrow, we have Alibaba announcing its earnings. For today, we had Disney, and we'll have to see how things go. Disney did relatively well when it comes to earnings. They beat on EPS with the $1.14 adjusted above expectations, and revenue at $22.57 billion. I went over most of this in my earlier video. You guys can see net income went up already. And then just to be very, very brief, just know that their guidance was pretty good. because of the fact that they are expecting some nice growth overall, excluding basically excluding ESPN Plus, which wasn't as strong for them. That's a little bit flat in terms of its growth. So right here, the full year profit in the entertainment streaming business, which excludes ESPN Plus, is expected to increase by roughly $875 million compared to the prior fiscal year, which is still showing double-digit growth, which is what was good for investors. That's why we saw a nice pop on Disney. Although the move didn't last, it kind of popped and dropped, but still good earnings. I would say more good than bad. Some sectors are not that strong for them, but overall not too bad. Anyways, that is it for my analysis of the news and such. There's nothing else that's too crazy coming out on the news. Now let's talk about what's happening with the charts. So looking at SPY, we're going to start off with SPY, the big one. We have this gap to fill all the way down around 591. So I think we might be coming down to fill that gap tomorrow, and we could be approaching the 590 area. Also, just know that 590 is going to be significant because it correlates with this. 590 is very close to our 50 EMA. So there's a very, very good chance you will be seeing that. Just to be safe, if we reclaim 595, SPY could bounce for 598. So watch those resistance areas. If we don't hold 592, we could be dipping all the way down to about 590 flats, the 50 EMA, which aligns with the gap fill. We have to hold 590 because if we don't hold 590 and this starts losing it, I think there's a good chance that we're going to be testing previous resistance, which is going to become the next support. So if you look at SPY, for instance, I have like a lot of scalp levels, but the main thing is just this line right here. If 590 fails this, we come down to 585-ish, very close to where this resistance is. That's all you need to know, guys. It's very simple. It's not too complicated. So tomorrow, the most likely possibility is tomorrow morning, we could see a little pop and then a dip, and this might be on its way down towards like the 591 area to fill the gap. If the gap support at 591 does not hold us, we're going to the 50 EMA. And I still think we're going to get very close to that anyways, very close to 590 flat. And we'll have to see if 590 holds. If it does not hold, we're looking for a bigger rug pull just for the time being. Now, I'm still a big bull for the end of the year. I think we're going to be breaking all-time highs again, but this is just a temporary dip. So SPY could dip to 590 and get a big bounce, or if we lose that, we go all the way down to 585-ish or all the way down to like the mid 580s, somewhere around that area, and then we get the bounce. So there's going to be a big bounce coming towards the end of the year. But for the time being, we're pulling back because we're getting ready for that. So this is just a pullback approaching the end of the year. We're pulling back because we're getting ready for a big squeeze. So just keep that in mind. I'm not a perma bear. I want to make that very, very clear. I'm just seeing a temporary pullback. On ES, the 4 hours showing some weakness, but also know this. The daily charts also has this like gap to fill, this area around the 5950 area. If 5950 fails on ES, we dip all the way down towards this resistance, which is now support, which aligns with our 20 EMA, nice confluence around 5915. That's going to be the next support. Our resistance is going to be around 5980. If we break that, we're looking for 6,000. But overall, ES looks a little bit weaker on the daily time frame. So ES is also suggesting downside. It's looking like a stronger possibility. This is favoring 5950, if not below that, so this imbalance towards the lower 5900s before it tries to bounce again. So just keep that in mind, guys. There is a risk of some downside. For Nvda, we're just range bound. We have this resistance to watch around 148, and we have this main support down here around the 145 area, not to mention 144 flat. So if 144 fails us on Nvda, that's going to be the main support, 144. If it does not hold, I could see us dip closer to about 140, just under 142. So we'll watch that. I presume downside's looking a little bit more probable, so look for a pop and a dip lower. And I think we could be approaching that 144 area, so just keep that in mind. Nvidia might get a slight dip because of Jerome Powell and also because of the chip disruption that's been going on. It's range bound though, so we'll have to see if buyers defend at 144, but just know there is that risk of downside because of what's happening with chips, not to mention with Jerome Powell. For Bitcoin, we're on a bit of a downtrend right here. We need to reclaim 87,768 to turn back up. We also have resistance around 89,000. I think the odds are favoring this dips a little bit more to about the 86,000 area, which is where we have this wicks. This is where buyers are defending it. It is dipping a bit more because of what the Fed just announced. So there might be a little bit more downside coming to closer to 86,000 before it tries to bounce again. So be very mindful of that as the most likely possibility when looking at the 4-hour time frame. How about Tesla? It looks bearish, guys. Unfortunately, the Fed has a big effect on interest rates, and that's going to affect Tesla sales. There was also a lot of talk today about the fact that their Cybertruck had the recall. This was a physical recall for particular parts. And then on top of the recall, there was also more negative news that came out involving a change in policy involving tax incentives. So there's a lot of negative news that came out for Tesla, not to mention the fact that it was due for a bit of a pullback after so much upside. So I think the odds are favoring this. We have resistance at the 310 area, and we have to reclaim around 319 to turn back up. If we don't reclaim 319, the odds favor downside. I think this imbalance is going to fill, taking us down towards 300. So I think 297 to 300 is our target. We're going to dip another 10 points at least. And we'll see if we bounce off 297. We might see some kind of like bounce off of that because we've been just straight up selling without much of a bounce. So I anticipate a little bit more downside than maybe a bounce off that area. Unless we lose 297, we will turn a lot more bearish. But for now, look for a little bit more downside. At 297 to 300 could be tested. We'll see if we bounce off that area. So just keep that in mind. For NQ, we look more bearish as well, thanks to Jerome Powell and also the other factors with tech starting to sell off a bit. We have resistance at 20,973, basically 21,000, or very close to that area. And we also have resistance at 21,050. If we continue to fall, we're also going to be looking for a dip back down towards 20,900, not to mention back down towards 20,800. So I think the odds are favoring downside all the way down towards 20,900 or below. So look for a little bit more downside on NQ before we see a big reaction, but the odds do favor more downside for me. For the QQQ, we look more bearish. I think tech is going to cause this to slow a little bit. We have resistance to watch for at 508 and 510. If we can't reclaim 508, I think the odds are favoring 505 or so. There's also this gap to fill on the QQQ back down to 505. So this is favoring 505-ish to about 500 maybe. If 505 does not hold us, we're looking for 500. But that 505 and 500 area is going to be tested. Look for a little bit more downside, and we'll see if we bounce off any of those levels. But watch for a little bit more downside on the triple Q. That's very probable in my personal opinion. Apple has this tough resistance at 228. As we test that, we do have a tendency of kind of like rejecting. So I think that this is also favoring that move to the downside back down towards 226. So look for 226 and we'll see if we bounce off that or not as the most likely case. But if we hold above 228, look for 230. And if we can't hold that, we're looking for 226. I think we dip to 225.5 to 226, this range right here before it tries to bounce as the most likely possibility. There was a nice setup on NEO. I was calling this out for a while, guys. If you guys were listening to me, I was saying NEO had a head and shoulders. I was leaning more bearish on it. And lo and behold, it's back in the fours. The head and shoulders played out. We were calling it out since this moment right here was like at 5.4. It's already dropped over a point, which is a very, very big move. That's like more than 20% we caught. So if you guys followed my call out, you would have made a lot of money. Not financial advice, but I'm just saying. Netflix is pumping, but just know, guys, that tomorrow is going to be a big day for Netflix. We have the very important boxing matches that are coming up, including Mike Tyson. That's going to be involved, which is pretty huge. So this is going to continue to maybe hold up approaching that. We have 840 as our target. If that breaks, we could be looking for 845. It just remains a little bit more bullish. But I think that the 840 area is going to be a tough resistance. So we might just see some consolidation around here because this is kind of like a buy the rumor, sell the news event. And this is due to pull back soon. So maybe it pushes a little bit more going into tomorrow, but then it might start to pull back down towards 830. So just keep that in mind. For Celsius, we have this resistance at our 20 EMA. If we break 27.75, we're looking for essentially 28 flats. If we reject here, if we can't hold back above that, there's a very, very good chance to start stepping towards 26.5 and all the way back down towards the 25s. So with this rejecting off its 20 EMA, I think this is looking a little bit weaker, especially after what the big guy has just said. So I think the odds are favoring that this is going to reject and make its way down slowly towards 26.5 or even below that. So just keep that in mind. For Supermicro, we look more bearish because of the chip disruption. I was calling out 16, then 15. I'm sorry, 18, then 15 as are my targets. We came down a little bit below 18, so now we're going to be looking for a target of basically the 15s very soon. So it still looks a lot more bearish, unfortunately. Unless we reclaim 21, I think the odds favor downside. Palantir pumped very nicely, but like I said in my previous video, we're going to likely be trading sideways between 62 and 60. I said that in my previous video. That's what Palantir is doing right now. Now, if we were to lose 58.93, I will turn a little bit more bearish. If we break past 62.5, I could turn a little bit more bullish. As of right now, we're just trading sideways, so I think the odds favor that happening. Might be a dip to about 58.93 tomorrow, then a bounce back up in a lot of sideways price action as the most likely case. So I see us potentially just continuing to trade sideways. Don't forget that this is going to be very, very important, so look for some sideways price action, and we'll see what happens for now. We might see a small dip tomorrow morning before it comes back. For Rivian, we got a pump and then dump. EV is kind of sold off because of some negative news that ended up coming out. I think they got a shift in their overall ratings. So I think that this could dip closer to 10 before it tries to bounce. So just keep that in mind. It might dip a little bit more. 10 flat could be coming before we see some buyers defend it. So watch for that very carefully. SoFi, because of what Jerome Powell just said, we have 13.29 being tested exactly as predicted yesterday. We'll have to see if this holds or not. It does look more bearish. It is favoring this wick to be retested, taking us down to the 13 area. It looks a little bit more bearish. We'll be watching this just to be safe. I'm a little bit concerned about the IWM. We have this giant gap to fill. So we'll have to see if 231 holds. If it does not hold, I think that we fill the gap back down to 226. If we hold 231.7, we could try to bounce for 234. But this is favoring 230, then 226 is the most likely possibilities. AMD is rejecting, looking a little bit more bearish. We could be tipping a little bit lower. We have 140 star resistance if this fails, so we're going to be looking for a dip. We have this gap to fill down here, not to mention the fact that there's a head and shoulders. So I think that AMD could be dipping closer towards the lower areas, such as 135 and 132. So watch 138 and 135 as our support, so we'll see what kind of reaction we get. There is a risk of some downside. We're on a bit of a downtrend right here for ARM. We'll have to see if we reclaim 139. If not, there is a risk of us coming back down towards 133, or even below that, back down towards 130. So I see some more downside risk for ARM. For Coinbase, we look a little bit more bearish. We have 285 as our resistance, and the support is going to be down here where this gap fill is around 272, not to mention all the way down towards 268. So I think the odds are favoring 272 and 268 for a little bit more downside for a coin before it tries to bounce, but look for a little bit more downside. I think Amazon's looking a little bit more bearish in my opinion as well because of the fact that we are approaching this support here. So look at resistance at 212 and 214. Look at support at 209.64. If that fails us, I could see this dip closer to 207. I think the odds favor 209.64, and we'll see what it does from there. So keep that in mind. There's a good chance we dip a little bit lower. Meta's rejecting here on a bit of a downtrend. We need to reclaim 580, or else it might be dipping all the way down to about this area right here, the previous resistance, very close to where our next support is going to be, in the 572 area. So we're looking a little bit more bearish right now. Notice how we got this liquidity grab. I was talking about this yesterday as a possibility. It might be grabbing liquidity before it starts dipping. That's what these hedge funds and institutions did, which is why they ended up making a lot more profits. They grab liquidity and then they start to dip this thing, especially if you have this imbalance to fill. So this is favoring the lower 570s for now. For Microsoft, there's a slight divergence here. This is still on an uptrend. It might dip and then try to bounce. So I could see it dip a little bit to about 423. And then we could be looking for a bounce between 423 and 421. So it's still bullish in terms of the trend. It might be a small dip, then a bounce. So just keep that in mind. For Google, it's also a little bit more bearish off this divergence. We do have a gap all the way down here. So if Google were to lose 175, where this imbalance support happens to be, I think it's going to fill the gap back down to about 171. The 171 is where the gap is. If we manage to hold above 177, we could attempt to rebound for 179. As of right now, guys, I think that it's looking a little bit weaker. It might come down closer to 175, but we'll see if it bounces or not. If it does not bounce off that, there is going to be a risk of it coming all the way down to fill the gap, so just keep that in mind. People are very interested in AMC and GameStop. Just know that GameStop did dip a bit, but it held its 20 EMA. So as long as we don't lose 26.1, GameStop could be pushing closer to about 30. It still has a nice accumulation. There is some upside potential, but it's not as strong as before. For AMC, it's the same thing. We're very sideways, very, very choppy, so it's not too fun to play this. As long as we hold 4.5, I could see an attempt for 4.7 again, a little bit more upside, but it's not that strong, guys. It's very choppy, so give it a little bit more time to develop. I predicted that GJT would be dipping lower, and that's what happened so far. It went a little bit lower than what I was expecting. So now I do anticipate it's going to test these lows closer to about 25 before it tries to bounce. For the VIX, I am thinking that this looks a little bit more. It's been dipping a bit, but we're going to be looking for a bounce on this. It's trying to hold the 14 area, so it might test 14.97 tomorrow for a small bounce, especially as we have another imbalance to fill. That could be indicative of the market potentially pulling back, so just keep that in mind. The 10-year is very flat right now. It's still holding up, so we'll have to see how Jerome Powell affects this, if we get some kind of reaction tomorrow for a push. And the dollar is bullish right now, so that, technically that should be bearish for the markets, but it hasn't really been affecting the market as much as of recent. So I'm going to kind of rule this out. I'm not going to, worry about what the dollar is doing to affect the markets. It's not really affecting us as much. It remains more bullish. So I think the market is going to dip a little bit lower. I think that's the most likely case for tomorrow, but we'll be watching to see if we hold our next levels of support, which are not too far from where we are. If we lose them, then expect more downside, and we'll have to see what happens from there. So for SPY, what that means is we could be dipping closer to 571 to fill our gap. Also at 591. 591 could be coming to fill that gap. And we also have 590 below that. We'll have to see if those levels hold. If they don't hold, we could be dipping all the way down to 585. If they do hold, we could try to bounce. So we'll be watching to see where this ends up bouncing. My view is the same, even though we are dipping and we're going to likely dip more tomorrow. just know that I'm still a big bull for the end of the year. I think the market will get a nice squeeze. But we're not ready yet, and there might be a little bit more downside to come. So we'll just have to see where we end up bouncing from. With that being said, I really appreciate you guys so much for listening. Please let me know if you guys like the new format with the memes in the very beginning of the video. And I'll be back tomorrow to give you guys more update on what happens with the data, especially as we have experts and inputs data in the morning. So thank you for listening, guys. Please have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another update. Until then, I just hope for the best for everyone, and I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you for listening, and peace out.